For hundreds of years, many have tried to explain away the existence of aliens, demons, and fallen angels. It has been labeled as fiction, the stuff that movies are created from. But now, even science has uncovered some astounding facts that are baffling the minds of people all over the world. The fact that there are 145 alien genes discovered by modern scientists that claim that some DNA is not from earthly ancestors should be enough to cause us to rethink things that we label as fiction. In the May 2011 edition of the Discover magazine, titled "You Are Not Human," referring to the Asian and Caucasian race in an article titled "Meet the New Human Family," states that there were times when more than one species shared our planet. The article also states that anatomically modern humans interbred with Neanderthals in the Middle East before they populated Europe and Asia. Scientists are now saying that the Neanderthal gene is only present in the Asian and Caucasian, not in the African, and that when the Africans migrated out of Africa, they mated with something else. The question we should be asking is, where did the Neanderthal come from? Did the humankind truly evolve from apes? Did Asians and Caucasians come from the mixing of the seed of the fallen angels? Are there aliens among us? Where has this strange DNA come from? Are the demons and aliens that many claim to have seen the same entity? Lastly, where do the fallen angels spoken of in the Bible fit into all of this?
Now, our pigmentation is contained not just in floating around at random, it's in packets, cellular packets of pigment called melanosomes.
At first glance, under the microscope, there was no difference between the packets of pigments in the golden variety and those in the normal variety.
And then we submitted part of that for electron microscopy, which has much higher resolution, and there's where we saw a difference in the number, size, and density of those melanosomes in those for the pigmented cells.
Dr. Cheng was struck by the fact that these same three differences applied to light versus dark-skinned humans. Our skin also varies in the size, number, and intensity of pigments. The team then isolated the gene responsible for skin pigmentation in the zebrafish and showed that a mutation caused the golden variety's pale skin.
So this must be the one between, this is average.
Out of curiosity, the researchers examined the databases listing all the human genes.
You don't see a flat line right around it.
Surprise! They found a very similar gene, SLC24A5. But how could they find out whether the gene had the same function in humans as in zebrafish? They tried an experiment, injecting the human gene into the golden zebrafish. Jason Mest did the procedure, and it worked. When injected with the human gene, the embryo of the golden variety developed darker markings. Add a human gene and a zebrafish can change its stripes. It was progress, but not the breakthrough they were looking for. Now Dr. Cheng had to show that humans had a mutation comparable to that of the golden zebrafish that would explain lighter skin in people. Research work, like music, requires keen intuition and subtle interpretation combined with a great capacity for analysis. The geneticist called in fellow researcher Victor Canfield and an anthropologist, Mark Shriver. They set out to find a mutation, but not just anyone. It had to affect nearly everyone with light skin or the population with European ancestry. The mutation also had to be almost totally absent from other populations. In the HapMap catalogs, these circles represent the frequency of the gene's various mutations in 4 populations: European, Chinese, Japanese, and Nigerian. The researchers' job consisted in finding a group made up of a circle of one color and 3 circles of another. One day, they hit upon just such a combination: 1 blue circle for the European population and 3 red ones for the other populations.
It was a very striking finding, and it wasn't quite the aha moment it could have been until Mark Schreiber, who's done more of this work, realized that the frequencies are not only unusual but extremely unusual. That this is very few genes show that pattern. In this case, that we have almost 100% of one variant in one population and almost 0% of the same variant in other populations.
The mutation identified in the circles consisted in a unique change: A for the European population, which becomes G in all the other populations. The letters A, C, T, and G represent the building blocks of DNA. One tiny change among the hundreds of thousands of possible combinations in the human genome. The researchers then showed that the gene played a central role in the evolution of European skin color. It was like winning the lottery.
So there are 3 billion bases in our genome. One letter of that, which changes 1 amino acid in this protein, seems to be responsible for the evolution of lighter skin color in Europeans.
But the gene doesn't explain the difference in skin color between blacks and Asians. Other, as yet undiscovered genes are likely involved. Still, it is the most important skin color gene yet discovered. We have the zebrafish to thank, not to mention Mr. Ba, for the inspiration. The discovery casts new light on an old theory.
It actually provides very great support for other people's work that have tried to explain why people have lighter skin in Europe, which is that in order to not get rickets, because we need vitamin D from the sun, we have to be exposed to that in our skin. You need lighter skin in order to make enough vitamin D to not get rickets to live further north.
According to the theory, some 200,000 years ago, the first modern humans, black Africans, started migrating outside Africa. But by showing that the original skin color of humans was black and that whiteness is a recent mutation in evolutionary terms, it doesn't contradict it. It's also a way of saying that whatever our skin color, our ancestors were black. As a doctor, Cheng saw applications for the discovery in the fight against skin cancer and other diseases.
This is a very important cancer susceptibility gene because lighter skinned people get a lot of skin cancer. It also causes susceptibility to acquired form of blindness, age-related macular degeneration. And perhaps this gene could be a target for treating melanoma, which is a very deadly cancer.
Mutate, to change in form or nature. Mutation. 1. The action or process of mutating. Synonyms: alteration, change, variation, modification, transformation, metamorphosis, transmutation. 2. The changing of the structure of a gene, resulting in a variant form that may be transmitted to subsequent generations, caused by the alteration of single base units in DNA, or the deletion, insertion, or rearrangement of larger sections of genes or chromosomes. Mutant. 1. A new type of organism produced as the result of mutation. 2. Undergoing or resulting from mutation. Mutant. 1. Freak, monster, mutation, deviant, oddity, monstrosity, or freak of nature.
Notice how his research has shown that Europeans and Asians are actually a mutation of the dark indigenous people of Africa. This means that mankind started off with dark skin, but through the infiltration of the human bloodline through sex and profuse mating, you now have those of lighter skin which are a derivative of dark indigenous people. Their DNA is actually mixed with fallen angels, and this is why you see the Neanderthal genes in whites and Asians. The white skin in Caucasians is a genetic mutation, and that is a fact that many whites and Asians have accepted and even teach openly, and with a great deal of pride, as a matter of fact.
Really, this is going to sound silly, but this is really, really important. Cutting-edge genetics. One of the areas I'm really lucky I'm blessed to work in 3 distinct areas of biology: immunology, genetics, and reproduction. And on the genetics side, I get to go to conferences and hear about advances in genetics in all species. And I was just at one a couple of weeks ago down at the Cold Spring Harbor Lab in Long Island, and I learned a bit about what's being known about the genome of Neanderthals, the genetic makeup of Neanderthals. The genome sequencers, led by Svante Pabo, who works in Germany, has taken tiny little fragments of Neanderthal bones, isolated DNA, and determined the genome of the Neanderthal, and used that information to determine, using genetic methods, how long ago Neanderthals and humans were a single species, where the common ancestor was. And they've also been able to compare human genomes and ask the question of whether there's any evidence of Neanderthal genes in the human genome. And they found that there is. And the amount is quite significant, upwards of 5 to 7%. Neanderthals used to live in the Neander Valley. You could have called it the Cayuga Lake Basin, but that's where they lived. And out of Africa came the modern humans, and the word the geneticists use is admixed. They admixed with the Neanderthals. And they all used to live in caves in those days like this. Came out of Africa, admixed with the Neanderthals. This was the Neanderthal territory. There was another group of Neanderthal-like creatures called the Denisovans. They lived up here in Siberia, and they have their genome has been sequenced. They were distinct from the Neanderthals. And so you can find in people of European and Asian ancestry evidence of about 7%, 5 to 10% of your genome is common with that of Neanderthals. We've been separated from them for 30,000 years or so. And in some of the tribes in Papua New Guinea and those islands out there, there's evidence for a different kind of genome, which is probably the Denisovan genome. And they might have 7% Neanderthal and 5% Denisovan. So they might be 12 or 15% different from us. And in fact, the Africans who came out from Africa have no evidence of any Neanderthal genes in them. No evidence of admixture. So they're the real pure humans. Homo sapiens. Really, really interesting, and it gives you a lot to think about. Right.
In 1987, Kahn and her colleagues published a paper showing for the first time that the markers stretched back to Africa, showing quite clearly that this was the birthplace of the human race. New Guinean tribesman, Parisian bartender, American teacher, Polynesian farmer, all were improbable relatives linked through one black woman 150,000 years ago. Their findings caused a sensation.
The responses of people were sort of amazing. The public was genuinely interested in certain aspects of it, but there was a tendency to misinterpret the data because of the terminology used to describe this woman, African Eve. And people thought it meant the biblical Eve, the single woman in the Judeo-Christian Bible, the wife of Adam. I have to say, even my own uncle sent me a Christmas card the year that our study was published saying, "How dare you, you know Grandma wasn't black."
Her work is rewriting human history. Through it, we now know the first mutations took place in Africa, maybe 150,000 years ago. Australian Aborigines are an ancient people, but they no longer look like their ancestors who arrived all those thousands of years ago. Their bodies have adapted, retaining all those characteristics needed to survive as hunter-gatherers in the harsh desert environment. Under the skin, we are all very much alike. Our DNA shows that we come from one very small gene pool.
If we look at the DNA of all of us, Australians, Africans, Europeans, we find that comparing the mitochondrial DNA of all of us, we show less variation. Even though there are billions of us and we're spread over the whole world, we show less variation in our mitochondrial DNA than we would find in, say, a small group of chimpanzees or orangutans or gorillas. Those apes show more variation, even in their small groups, than the entire human race shows.
But if all the people from around the world descend from such a small gene pool, why do we all look so completely different? Natural selection and adaptation to the environment are the most important factors. Sexual selection is crucial. Climate dictates body shape. The colder the environment, the shorter and more stocky you become to retain heat. Height relates to diet. The most obvious and striking difference is color. And that's also a part of our genetic inheritance. Nina Jablonski, a leading scientist looking at the evolution of skin color, was working on the importance of folic acid in fetal development when she stumbled by chance on the answer.
I started doing research on the evolution of skin color after preparing a lecture for a class over 10 years ago. It was interesting, preparing for the class, I realized that there was very little that was known about the evolution of skin color, and what was known wasn't very cogent. I discovered an interesting paper when I was preparing that lecture that showed that there was an interesting and important relationship between ultraviolet radiation and a very important biomolecule called folate.
Folic acid is crucial for embryonic development, and too much ultraviolet radiation from the sun destroys it. So our ancestors in tropical Africa needed to be dark to protect their survival. But too little ultraviolet prevents the formation of vitamin D, causing rickets, which can kill. So as they migrated to the sunless north, they had to grow paler to survive. She has uncovered a very simple evolutionary equation.
When we look at the pattern of skin pigmentation among indigenous peoples today, we see very dark people in equatorial regions with high UV and significantly lighter people as we get toward the poles. And it turns out that melanin, the natural sunscreen, is phenomenally good at screening out ultraviolet radiation. To some extent, it's too good. And in order for us to be able to make enough vitamin D in our skin, we have to reduce the amount of melanin that exists in the skin. And so what we see in the course of our species history, as we've moved from an area of high UV to areas of lower UV, our skin has become more and more depigmented.
Well, if you make the assumption that the human race arose like around the equator and that skin color, dark skin color would be the phenotype, then are you assuming that as people moved outward, there was a mutation, and if you were in the north, it allowed that mutation to live, which is how we got white people?
Yes.
Would that follow?
Yeah.
Jeremiah chapter 49, verse 10. But I have made Esau bare. I have uncovered his secret places, and he shall not be able to hide himself. His seed is spoiled, and his brethren, and his neighbors, and he is not.
Skin that has no melanin shows visibly different than skin that does have melanin, using a special UV camera. It is very clear that something is lacking in skin that is melanin deficient, which is why it needs protection from the sun. Without special protection applied to the skin, pale skin can become severely damaged by the sun and is more susceptible to developing melanoma or skin cancer. Notice how when you apply sunscreen or sun protection creams, the pale skin almost appears to be melanated when viewed through the lens of a special UV camera. When viewing normally, this skin does not have the appearance of melanated skin. Using a special UV camera, skin that has no melanin shows visibly different than skin that does have melanin. It is very clear that something is lacking in skin that is melanin deficient, which is why it needs protection from the sun. Without special protection applied to the skin, pale skin can become severely damaged by the sun and is more susceptible to developing melanoma or skin cancer. Notice how when you apply sunscreen or sun protection creams, the pale skin appears almost melanated when viewed through the special lens of a UV camera. When viewing normally, this skin does not have the appearance of melanated skin. Notice, if you go back only a few hundred years, the indigenous people all around the world were dark-skinned. You have the Native Americans, the Mexicans, South Americans, Asians, Australians even, the people of India, Arabs, and even those who occupied large areas of Europe were all dark-skinned. But now what we're seeing is that many of these groups have white or very light skin because the dark population has been infiltrated. Some through intentional breeding out, such as blanqueamento, which is a process of whitening. This is where they'll bring in European males to mate with the indigenous populations. And some through rape and subjugation. The whole world has basically been whited out or is being whited out, and this is causing a lot of confusion to those who are the offspring that has been produced from the mixing of races.